Welcome back to Voices from the House of Zophiel. Today, we are delighted to have Anatolia
Karteras.
Karteras. Get the Greek in your mouth, Nats. Okay. She's a practitioner whose practice is rooted in the gnosis gained through winding eclectic approaches that refuse to be confined by tradition. And I think I said before when we were talking before the podcast that actually there's something about being confined is certainly an important factor of why we do magic in the first place. She believes that, because of this confinement, it's really important that we can do things with witchcraft. She merges traditional witchcraft with animism, Greek folklore, and nature magic. She was born to migrant Pontian Greek parents, raised on the land of Melbourne, called the Wurundjeri. Right?
The Wurundjeri tribe. Yeah.
Wurundjeri tribe. It's Melbourne, around Australia, and now she's based in France. Anatolia's relationship to the various lands we walk on and the land of the body we walk with informs a practice where nature, activism, and magic meet. Anatolia is a project manager, counsellor, and storyteller by trade. She also uses writing, drawing, dance, and song to commune with and express the forces that will play with her. And I'm sure that a lot of people, well, I know, that listen to this certainly resonate with some of those creative acts. At the heart of her magic and creations is a fascination and honouring of how the trance states of ritual magic, another thing that people know that I invest a lot of time in, trance, in relationship with natural forces can inform the creative process, transforming human relationships to life itself. How cool is that?
It sounds cooler than it actually is, but
well, I don't know. Well, you're going to tell us a whole bunch of things, and I already know before you start that there will be a good whack, a good dollop, a good learning mechanism within this for everybody with their own practices too. So I'm super delighted you've agreed to do this podcast today.
Very happy to be here. Yeah.
So I suppose it's right and proper, really, to ask you to talk a little bit about yourself and how you came to work with magic through the lens of myth.
Yeah. Well, look, I also just want to. I was thinking as you were speaking, I feel like I need to caveat everything I say with this really is my own weird winding path. And at no point do I actually want to claim that I know the way things are and that I create some law that is. I really, one thing that I've just continuously been humbled by is curiosity to just keep following breadcrumbs rather than getting really stuck on, I found something, this is a revelation, and now this is how it is, full stop. So yeah, just to anyone out there, hello to the listeners, and yeah, may you hear this and filter it through your own system and see what works and what doesn't for you, and that's all good. Doesn't work for everyone, Yeah.
No, but I do think there's a high value in being honest. This is your practice you're cultivating.
Yeah.
I come across, I'm sure you can, an enormous amount of practitioners. Some practitioners are highly well known and have their practice based in something that is fairly traditional, that they look after, they protect, and they have a whole bunch of systems and rules and regulations. And others that have their own much quieter practices that are not based on high traditions and rules and regulations and rituals. And yet, why can't we have both? And there's something about, claiming that we don't know everything is a high form of being intelligent, to be honest with you, right? It's just one of those things that I know some people that are not honest, that are not authentic. And actually, once we abandon that and become a lot cleaner, then we are ourselves, and we do start to grow in a better rhythm, right?
Exactly.
That's it.
Well, that's it. And I think, just to what I always come back to, I'll get to your question. I will. I promise I will.
My bad. Right.
No, it's my bad. I love a good winding path. I said, like, you say this is the way, and I can't help but go somewhere else.
Yeah.
But there is, we all kind of know this, but on the temple of the door of Delphi, this says the words gnosis self-don, which means know yourself. So really, my work has it is around knowing the small self, knowing the self, rather than claiming that I know everything.
Yeah.
But it's just continuously walking the path of knowing the self. And all I can do is speak from where I'm at this point in the journey right now, which might sound very different in 5 years or 10 years. So, and it sounds different to how it was when I was little. So maybe I'll take you back. I'll take you back in time.
Please.
Yeah, I sort of came back to your question, how did I sort of come to working with magic through the lens of myth? As a young child, growing up in Melbourne, Australia, with Greek parents, I went to Greek school. We studied Greek mythology then, but really the teachers, I remember at the time thinking, wow, this is so interesting, but why is it not like, why does it sound interesting, but it's not, something's not quite landing.
Yeah.
And I think it was actually because the teachers didn't quite know, they didn't know how to communicate myth and story through this magical lens. It was just to tell the kids about our history as Greeks, but actually not to really activate within us the keys that exist within these ancient stories that actually are still relevant to us here now today. So I've spent so much of my youth hungry for magic, hungry for something. My line was always, but what's underneath? What's behind? Like, I think so many listeners probably,
Yeah.
we're saying, yes, but this is what I'm seeing here, but I know there's something behind this. So I spent a lot of my life asking that, yeah, and to cut a pretty long story short, and if you want to interrupt at any point and ask,
No.
please do.
Yeah, I just you said something that
Yeah, go ahead.
talk about for a million years and we haven't got time for. All right. Some of my background involves studying storytelling and myth.
Mm.
And what I'm trying not to do is say some things that I want you to say. But there's something you said was really super important to me, about what's behind these myths, what's behind, this superficial storytelling that people learn about, that is just on the surface of things, and yet it's not what it is. There's something else, and it's almost like the waste bin of things left behind. That's the stories we tell. I there's two. Sorry, I've got two things in my head now. So, one thing that somebody who works with us, I can't mention her name, obviously, but suddenly said on Friday that she mentioned finding out, and she mentioned something about wearing a red cap and things like this, and red, and I'm like, and Lenny, wife's Little Red Riding Hood. Now, Red Riding Hood is an enormously important feminist story, right? It's all its versions and absolutely fantastic. And we said this to her, nearly said her name, and she said, "Oh, she's gone away for the weekend thinking about this because it's hugely important." Then we
Yeah.
start talking about what happened with you when you were growing up in school, in the Greek school, things like this, and
Yeah.
wanting to know more about these traditions. And actually, what we're talking about is, how can I couch this well? As cultural transmissions, right? Sounds
Mm,
grand, doesn't it? Right? Cultural transmissions, and it's how we say stuff. What are the codes and conventions behind things? The symbolic nature of things, the metaphors,
mm,
and that desire to want more is fantastic, right?
mm.
So that's what we want more of. We want more of this kind of meaning making. So I hope that
Exactly.
makes sense.
Yeah, this the meaning making piece is big for me because actually my partner often says, "Gosh, you're always like looking for the meaning behind something."
Yeah,
You can,
yeah,
and my joke is I can make meaning out of anything, but I think there's a fine line between um, receiving the symbols around us and interpreting them and making use of them in a really balanced way, and then almost being way too over meaning, like finding the meaning in everything, but meaning can constantly shift. And it means then we're almost in this state of like psychosis of just seeing,
wow, right,
so I really feel there's this
yeah,
happy balance
yeah,
between what is keeping me in a state of really solid balance and how do I receive these symbols and work with them, and then how can we not even function in society because we're always
right,
earing behind.
yeah,
Yeah. S-
yeah.
s- oof.
That's massive, isn't it? I mean, I mean, what my next sort of thing I was going to touch on, but it kind of is weaving in there, isn't it? Is that approaches to myth. Okay,
Mm.
I mean, you term it as a living magical map.
Yeah.
It kind of lends itself to that. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about that,
Yeah.
and anything else that comes into your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I also just want to set a little bit of a like ground rule in my mind of how I speak about myth. I will probably use story and myth interchangeably just
Fine.
because, I see, and also because it factors in fairy tales and wonder tales too. Like they all sort of sit under the banner of story, but each of them has a different technology, I guess,
Yeah,
within it. Myth really being these
yeah,
myths being these sacred narratives that humans began telling themselves, really because they were learning about the forces of nature and the cosmic order that we live within,
right,
and and humans' understanding of the unseen forces, and then sort of fairy tales, in my mind, being really about the encounters that humans have with the other world, and our interaction with spirits and ancestors, and um, and then kind of wonder tales, in my mind, the way I've worked with them is as these archetypal stories where the supernatural realm is really normal, um,
Hmm.
and and about how humans transform themselves. So all of them, I love to use symbols in my mind of like, well, is this story? Does it have keys?
Ah,
A map? Is it a mirror? Is it a
yes,
compass?
yeah,
Like how when I look at a story,
yeah,
that's sort of how I'm breaking it down. Is this right now? This feels more like it's a map because it's saying this is kind of what exists in this world, and how do I put my awareness in that story and make sense of the world in my inner realm, but also the world that we live within. And then I feel like there are stories that feel like they're a compass that take us towards, this line around where's your true north? Everyone says, "Where's your true north?" It's
right,
like,
right,
where the is this a story that's taking me towards a true north within not just the self, but also humans? Um,
yeah. Yes. I'm just going to ask you another question
yeah,
about. So I think the question. it's going to be about something to do with some of the words you said, but
Mm.
just to tell everybody something that was really weird, right?
Mm.
I listened to this podcast and suddenly my phone starts to try and communicate with me, which I don't want, obviously, and I don't want the podcast. But what it's doing is something I can't explain. And what I can't explain is why is it recounting almost like nursery rhymes to me? And I've no idea. So at some point, the phone had to go off and talk to itself. So I just thrown it outside because I'm not. I don't want it interfering with things. But what is it about?
Mm.
Rhymes, stories, and whatever. And so I just sort of share that with people because sometimes when you talk to people, other things happen. And I think that's about something else that's happening alongside us.
Absolutely. And actually, when you mentioned it, do you know what popped into my mind was, it's the whole thing of, and I don't want to go down a different pathway here, but it's all like phones, surveillance, but also AI and how AI is receiving our words and actually interpreting it and it, we as humans, we know this, we live in story. That's the way that narratives, our brains, the way we operate is through story and lights and movement. And so stories are really important to us, and I think the way that we are going to be interfacing with stories through AI
Yeah.
is actually going to change. It's changing a lot. I'm not saying I'm anti-AI. I'm pro. I'm not. All I'm saying is, as someone who's just aware of the shifts in our world, um, AI is being used to write stories for Hollywood, for movies. So instead of these kind of the creative human mind creating the stories, and it may be having keys hidden in the stories that we watch, the movies that we watch, we're kind of now watching a lot of, they've been stripped of a lot of the old keys, and they're actually just about entertainment, which is really just about numbing. So I think this comes to another question we were talking about, which is around which stories really have keys and which ones are maybe devoid
Well,
of. Yeah.
but actually, yes, yes, right, entirely that. And there is so much noise about AI and whatever. And I think it's instead of fight it, make it useful and make it work for you better. Just to come back to that as well, and I just thought I'd share again with yourself and the audience of what was just coming out of there, which is completely random to me, which sounded like
You write it down.
but I just wrote down all the words
Amazing.
quickly before I lost them because I think it's sometimes you never know it comes back. It's a bit like spell casting.
Yeah.
It's the intonations and the words that are being said, but almost it sounded like a nursery rhyme, but it went something like bitter butter batter, pitter putter patter pity. And it's almost I've gone cold now, but in my work with daemons and stuff, occasionally it's these kind of almost repetitions of patterns of words that come through from other
Mm.
pitches,
Mm.
right?
Oof.
What happens, isn't it? It's gone cold.
Oof. There we go. Yeah, I can feel that
My
too.
arms have gone up. There we are. Well, not on my head because I haven't got any, but there we go. But isn't it? I mean, this. Let me just drag ourselves back, myself, really, back to some of the things that we're talking about. But living magical maps, and that's a idea. Beautiful idea. It does conjure up, in its truest sense, lots of image-based things of living magical maps, and there's so many beautiful books written about that, not necessarily for children, but for us all, about things like this, journeys, talking. I mean, it was weirdly enough, I was watching Sandman uh, last night, this, that, the other, and the relationship where he starts to drag in um, stuff about Oz and Dorothy and stuff like this, and those kind of
Mm.
magical stories. of the self and realization. And then you mentioned, so I've got that in my head. You're doing this to me right now, right? It's your fault. And
Yeah.
I start using words like curiosity, breadcrumbs, winding paths, mirrors, maps, compasses.
Mm. Yeah.
It's in our mouth, right?
It's actually fun that you say it's in our mouth because before we began, and I was just tuning into everything, I was like, okay, wait a minute. Before I go into this podcast, let me just stop for a moment and really just open my body to the people who existed on this earth well before I did, the ones who told these stories, the ones who received these stories, and I was really in the mouth. I thought we call them oral; they were passed down orally, and we use this word oral, but actually it was like mouth open, mouth. Like these. It's through the mouth as a door that we receive these stories, we experience, and then we spit them out, and then these mouths enter ears, enter bodies. Those bodies then take the story in their own way, and these stories then travel through bodies throughout time. So these stories, we hear scraps of them, but they've been spilled into human bodies who've then walked across lands, who've then changed the stories because of their experiences. And so it's just like, what a beautiful tapestry
Wow.
to be part of. Like,
You've kind of just done it again, haven't you? It just reminded me of something that was part of yesterday's stuff, that
yeah.
mental stuff yesterday that I was doing, and now, and something way back in time when I studied. Um, I studied for a time trance work in terms of what does it do in hypnotherapy and things like this, right? And it did change my working practice. Never mind these days, it rubs along silently in terms of magical practice. But I did learn several things about somatic impact of how we speak to each other, right? And it's well known this, it's just science now. But I'm talking about 10 years ago, right? So um, when people say nasty things to each other, actually it does poison your body in many different
Yeah.
ways because it's proven now that what we hear can actually damage us. There was an experiment. I did this training in Oxford, right? It was quite cool to go and do it there. But there was some stuff about the effects of bad words on people's bodies. I mean, sarcasm will definitely harm your liver and things like this, right? However, the weirdest thing is, it's not necessarily, well, it is important that, and you think about some world leaders at the moment of what they're actually putting out there is vitriol and poison, right? Mentioning nobody, obviously.
Mm.
However, nonetheless, all that kind of stuff, that if you say bad things to other people and you mean it, not only do you poison the other person, because you hear it, you poison yourself.
Mm.
And it's right what you say that even in storytelling, if the storytelling is meaningful and has purpose, it does travel through your body, which super connects with yesterday.
Mm.
When, and again, it's Bob Plymouth's fault. So if he's listened to this one, it's your fault, Bob. That Bob's super cool. He's so amazing, and reading his stuff is so dense. And looking at the netherworld, Celibate goes into the nightshade cycle and stuff like this, but actually all the connections in magical practice of what becomes, and the mouths of the two ends of transitional underneath the nightshade actually is Newit, who's the night goddess that goes through a mouth through the vulva and gets reborn through and then into the mouth, and it keeps moving forward until you come on. So we carry these stories, like you say, and it transforms us. It's part of our somatic transmission and transition, as well as it is in terms of just a story. Right?
Mm.
Never as simple, is it?
Absolutely. One of my favorite storytellers, Martin Shaw, I think, said something like, yeah. He said I went to quite a few of his events over the last few years, and he says something like stories are weird ways of telling the truth. And
Oh, yeah.
I've taken that and sort of worked with it as they're these twisty, turny, bizarre ways that actually take us to the truths that we already knew, but sometimes we just need to see them in different ways. And I also see stories as diamonds in the sense that they have lots of different faces, and depending on the way that we look at the, right now I'm working with a few different myths to prepare for an event in a few months' time, and every time I look at these myths, I see a different face of the diamond. And because for me as a practitioner, but also as a storyteller, I have to be able to unzip my little human Anatolia self and actually put on shapeshift, see through the eyes of a character, a force, what is trying to be revealed through this story, and back to that word again, to be curious and to say, oh, what's this face of the diamond showing me right now? Oh, what's this face showing me? It's yeah, but they're all truths. They're just lots of different truths, right? Like, and we, yeah. Anyway. Mm.
Well, I mean, we've got Alice, right? Another
Mm.
important thing in my life.
Mm.
Learning about Alice. We do collect a hell of a lot of antiquarian books on Alice in Wonderland through the Looking Glass and stuff like that.
Mm.
Logically, that transitional self curiosity and who am I? First book to the second book is what's it all about anyway? And
Mm.
finding your own regency, becoming the White Queen again, and things like this, and
Mm.
sorts of super scary stuff in those books. Like the Red King sleeps and why you can't wake him because if you do, you'll disappear.
Oh.
Yes, you're in his dream.
Ah.
And there's something important about recognition of the self to gain your own self for your own sake,
Mm.
not in other people's stories. You are your own story. And
Exactly.
all sorts of lovely stuff about that. But there's just one. I'm going to get back to the questions in a minute. There's just one thing. No, go on. Sorry, you.
And I wanted to say that I love this because we're bouncing, but yeah, something you said about, yeah, we're all our own story, that our protagonists of our own stories. And I think again, there's a point where we can be the protagonist from a really, I use this word again, but from a really balanced place of understanding that everyone is their own protagonist.
Right.
And then there's also the I'm the protagonist because I'm the hero of everyone's story. And that's where it shifts into, a very dysregulated form. It's like the shadow side of the being our own protagonist. And I think this is why it's important to know that we are also helpers in other people's stories. There are times where we are the little bird whispering on the branch to someone else who's a hero, and we have to know that we are part of this web of many stories interweaving. So there's a humility too to know that I can be my own protagonist, but I'm also in service too.
You said another thing now. I'm just writing stuff down because I need to write it down in my other book later, my notes and stuff. But birds whispering in our ears. I mean, we're touching on other big stuff on that one. I mean, it's like Sufism and
Yeah, the Conference of the Birds.
all that.
Uh,
My God, right. Sorry.
mm,
Yeah, you just, yeah. The other thing,
mm,
I'm going to get back to some of the questions we agreed, but
sure.
'cause I want to get through some of that stuff. But I'm such having a lovely time here. But I think that something else present in my head at the moment is this thing called limning, which, yeah, I was like, no, that isn't in my common language and this, that, and the other, but it belongs to creativity in some ways. But its more archaic sense is it's crossing thresholds. It's crossing, it's liminality, right? Liminality, right? It's crossing the boundaries from one to the other, but it's almost like a suggestion of it's something like that I can gather. Becoming like a cloud, or you dissolving across into another realm. You know, you're not necessarily making a linear transitional thing. I hope this makes sense, but it's kind of like this you're blobbing, moving like water or like clouds, or like, you know, you dissolve into and appear on this thing, these other realms of existence, realities, similar but different realities and things like this. This took my head off for about 45 minutes of like, wow, that's such a cool expression. And I think that in stories, you are limning across the different parts of the story. You're kind of moving with that, and you are changing because of that to almost cope with the different chapters of the self.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that bit. Oh, sorry, was that
No, was that mad? I mean, is that
that was
crazy? I just like, whoa.
well, I think as you were speaking, I was thinking about how storytelling itself, when a storyteller knows that it is a ritual, when they really know, this is a moment where it's my honor to, as a guide, to take people through these states of consciousness, to actually give them bones so that their imagination can flesh those bones. And a storyteller who knows, okay, right now we might be in a very everyday, wonderfully mundane state of mind. We're all talking about, you know, food and what we're doing for the holidays, and then there's a moment where it's like time stands still, and it's the moment, the threshold between the mundane world and the world that we're just about to step into, which is the world of story, where we can stop and we sort of can take a breath. And a storyteller can, like a galloping horse, can sort of take us from one state to the other state and then shift to go into another state. And depending on where the story is, you know, we have, say, Orpheus going from the everyday, he's going from his world, but then when he plays his music
Yeah.
to the natural forces, and from the natural forces, he's in a different state. So as a storyteller, to be in that state yourself, and then as a listener, to yeah, to really allow ourselves to be taken. It's a special thing. It's so special. And then actually, I want to just finish one. Sorry, I can see you're about, but I think it's really important, just like any guide, any storyteller, we have to bring people back home again. So at the end, to close, you know, we bring them back to their bodies and back to knowing that we have little pieces of information that we might not have had before. We have them now. You've all got different breadcrumbs. How is your body going to, how is your oven going to cook that bread? You know? Yeah.
And some of us have slower cooking times than others, right?
Which is fine, right? Yeah, because maybe the bread might be different and it might be a different type of tasty, and that's okay. That actually, for me, that speaks so much to I've wanted, and I know I'm not alone here, but I've wanted the magical practice to my practice to really bear fruit quickly. It's like, come on, give me the results now. And actually, it's just been shifting the last few years when I've realized that this is really about relationship building and curiosity to learn about the spirits and the other worlds, rather than just expecting the outcome. You know, it's the same with art. When we're constantly in outcome, what's the outcome, and we're not actually in process, so much richness is lost.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I was certainly in painting that I know so many people that are fairly new to painting, and what they want to do is they want to complete a picture. And yet that's about expectation of something, and needing that to happen because you need the kind of instant hit and stuff like this. But actually, painting takes as long as it does. It could take years to complete a painting, and anyway, probably you will never complete a painting anyway, because I think somebody said, and I can't remember the quote, but it's like it's when it, there is nothing more you can do.
Mm.
Leaving it alone is where it ends.
That's right. When you've removed all the extraneous sort of, and that's what's left is
And,
the core of it. Yeah.
and it's what you don't do. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a life thing, knowing what you don't do, and everything else becomes a little bit easier. But
Exactly.
yeah, that's a hard lesson to learn. But there we are. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm gonna really try my best to get back to some of these questions because there's some
Fine.
other questions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Cool. Let's do our best.
Well, I don't know. I can't promise you. Because yeah, no,
I,
let's do it. Right. So, here's a nice one. Right. I'm moving from living magical maps slightly, but if we could just touch and move towards myth, right? And I mean, when people mention myth, then you think about Joseph Campbell and things like this, right?
mm,
And even though it's very dated and it's difficult to digest some of that at the time it was written, in terms of what we know about being different these days, etc., and some of the terms he uses, there's a
yeah.
core value to some of his stuff still. And so I'm going to ask you this question: Can you give me an example of a myth that's been a magical initiation for you?
Mm.
Hmm.
Mm, let's see, which one wants to come up? Because as I was preparing for this, I was thinking of all the different ones, but I think the one that feels really alive right now is that, yeah, when I was back in Melbourne. It was 2020. I mean, cast all of our minds back to that time, 2020, right? And I was I was actually in a really, really, really dark place.
Hmm.
And I say dark from a place of, yeah, really, you could say I was in the underworld, very confused, very uncertain about who and what's going on and who am I and wait. And a lot of just those old self-worth pieces just raising their little heads up and yeah, and actually just a little bit more context without giving too much away. But I was with my ex at the time, and who is now absolutely my best friend, and that's a whole other very exciting story, actually. But he's an incredible musician, and
Right.
so a lot of the self-worth pieces were also around my own artistry. That it was comparison, and it's yeah, it was, well, what's the point of what I do? It's not as exciting, and it's not as well crafted.
Yeah.
I've always been a little bit sloppy and just anyway. And so I was going through all of this, and I came across the myth of Inanna, which
Oh,
is a little bit of a cliche now. Everyone, it's like Inanna's, she's on hot on all the tongues of a lot of women who want to feel empowered. And but I came across her, and just the story, to any of the listeners out there, many will know, and some who don't know, of course, I highly recommend going and having a look. But it's this process of the Queen of Heaven going into the underworld for her sister's husband's funeral, and as she enters the underworld, she's being stripped of all of these items of power that make her who she thinks she is. And it's, and as I was reading the myth, and I really felt those parts of myself being stripped, and I actually think unknowingly, um, I unknowingly got myself almost trapped inside a bit of the mythic story. And I think this is where, as practitioners, we need to be a little bit careful with how much chaos do we want in our lives? Do I really want to take myself all the way through to the depths of this? Or can I also see it a little bit removed and not go in, like, not turn my whole life upside down? But at the time, I just went in, and I really like felt I was being absolutely scraped empty. Friends, relationships, so many parts of, yeah, just my understanding of myself and the world were just being stripped away. And I ended up actually turning the process into a short film that was screened at the Melbourne Fringe Festival in 2020. So it was my way of coming to terms with what was going on for me. And then it was funny that when it was screened and I finished the short film, it was almost as if, like, click, and it's done. And I just felt relief. It was almost like the story had just dissolved and I was back out again. I'd popped out and I was a new form of me. It's like I'd gone in and then I could take a breath because I'd gone through the process I needed to go through. So that for me felt like quite a big initiation in in well, in my creativity, in understanding the role that stories can play in our lives if we really go in, and also in the sense of actually self-acceptance and of who I am and the point that I am at that point in time.
It's I think I'm right. I could be very wrong. It is Sunday. It is Sunday, but alchemical processing. Calcinato, I think, is the stage I'm thinking talking about, is where you've been stripped down to the bones, if not nothingness. And it's a point of, whether you like it or not, letting go of where others will take parts of you from you, and you take parts of the rest of you, and to shed this, for want of a better word, the flesh off the bones, and then you're left with being totally vulnerable to the elements and everything, and realization where, and it happens to us all in really hard moments of our life, that pain, utter desolation and pain, and a lot of us have gone through that, I'm sure, if not again, but we have. The self-teaching in there is who we are, really. And we do throw away, actually, that's a Freudian slip. We do throw away and around this idea of authenticity. It's such a lazy word these days, but really it's about who are you, and it definitely goes back to all that good work of transpersonal psychologists of working out who am I and things like this, and it's beautiful. And they are stories, aren't they? Terrible stories of the self, and but grand lessons, so we are better later, and we can use that to support others going through similarity. Talk about the true empathy stuff there. Storytelling is one of those magical kind of empathetic occasions, right? That we learn from. Wow, that's another one, isn't it? Wow. Wow. And I mean, how do you recognize when a myth is calling you? How do you know that?
Yeah, I think for me, it's been almost a feeling of being haunted and followed.
Right.
And seeing symbols and items that almost like, or situations that almost feel like they're shinier, they stand out a little bit. It's like my eyes are being drawn into something that, so, and it's almost like the essence of a story is coming through things that are happening in my life where I'll stop and say, whoa, this feels bigger than my tiny little human story. Like this feels like what's circling me? There's something circling me here, and I need to just stop and pay attention. I think the last few years have been really quite big years in my life. I left Australia. I just to yeah. So I'll give a little abridged version to a very special. Aha! No, it's just showing me a tarot card. Yes, of course.
It's this, right?
Yeah, the wands of carrying. Yeah,
Carrying.
yeah, carrying. Yeah, absolutely. Being, it's we are carrying something. Something is carrying us. It's like what? But there's something here. There's work to be done. There's almost like a hot spot on the highway that says, "Here, stop here." And that's what I my little antenna kind of activate when now he's showing me the card of the star. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a um, yeah, so the last couple of years have been a really big few years. I was with my ex at the time, and we were in Australia. We decided to walk the Camino, if anyone knows the Camino de Santiago. And actually, on the Camino, I I ended up meeting someone else. And at the time, I remember thinking, well, this is just, you know, what is this? And I remember walking the Camino every day. We were going through the Meseta, which is the center, the middle part, which is sort of known as the desert lands. And I was very much in this place in my mind, like here we have my love, we're in Australia, we have this life in Australia, but actually I've met someone, and why am I being drawn somewhere else? Like, what is it? It was more than just, oh, the everyday passion of, no, it was like, wait a minute, I'm on this weird crossroad. Something's happening here. And because of the lens that I see things through story, I was kind of realizing, like, well, wait a minute, this is not just my little human story of my desires. There actually is something bigger than me that is pushing me. Um, and there are a couple of stories, like there's the Tristan and Isolde, and there's Dermot and Grania, which is another one that's around being drawn in down different paths. And anyway, long story short, but I ended up moving to France, and my whole life changed. And my ex is actually now he's my best friend, and I've actually written a fairy tale about this whole experience. I've sort of turned a very painful human story of a lot of confusion and uncertainty, but I lived through it to a point that I could then turn around and look at it like it's a biographical story. It's actually now it can be transformed into a fairy tale. And so yeah, back to your question, how do you recognize when a story is calling you? That's what it was about. It was because it lives itself through everything that happens in life. It's being the story is whispering everywhere through the people we speak to, through the dreams we have, through the things that happen to us. And we have to stop and just say, wait, is this mine, or is it maybe it's part of something bigger that I am finding my way through?
Yeah. Indeed. It kind of it reminds me of a couple of things.
Mm.
I'm restraining myself from talking about all sorts of gumph, right? But anyway, um, something I do with others, and part of the work I do with others is work with the story of the self and things like this.
Mm.
Obviously Jungian and stuff like that. But anyway, um, I asked them, what is the story, fable, or nursery story that they're thinking of right now?
Mm.
Very often it's image based, but very often it's this. And some people go, oh, well, yeah, it's this story from when I was about, usually when people are around 11, 12, something like this.
Mm.
Transitional stuff, right? And I remember two stories which were really meaningful in terms of what you've just spoken about in terms of realization and things like this about is what's happening with my story, is it part of something grander? And there was a French woman, obviously not going to mention her name, that she said to me, oh well, it's Cinderella. And I said, so which part of the story are you thinking about? Because that's what is it? And she said, oh, well, it's the part where she twirls round and she's in a beautiful dress. And, no, but she's, it's rubbish. And I said, well, it may be, but I just want to leave that thought in your mind. Anyway, we finished our work for a long period. All sorts of stuff happened. And then one day I was on a particular campus and I could see somebody run towards me and I thought, oh, shit, what have I done? Right? And it was her. And she said, I know what it means. I know what it means. I said, what? She said, well, Cinderella, she returned from being poor to somebody who was a real self. And I said, yeah. And I said, so how would you say that differently? And this, that, and the other. And she said, well, she discovers that she was royal and she wasn't poor and meaningless and had a job anyway and it was taken away from her and things like this. So I said, well, it's finding your regency and things like this, right? And that was such a super massive kind of revelation for her that actually made a difference to how she felt about herself because she was going through a period she wasn't recognized and she didn't really know it. So the stories are a mirror to what goes on. And that led me to, over a number of years, to think about, well, what is your story now?
Mm.
And I know one of my stories is Peter Pan. I'm not divulging. You I need that bit of therapy right now, but in a nutshell, that I kind of grew up with an idea of Peter Pan. I love Peter Pan. It was read to me as a child and things like this. I used to love the movies and whatever. And I was kind of made reference to certainly my mother of the pan-like quality, Peter Pan-like qualities of this, I'll never grow up and I don't care. And of course I didn't. I went to our school and whatever I can remember of that, it was great. I just played. And then I entered parts of my life where I had to get a job and be responsible and whatever, and went through a difficult divorce and things like this. And it was a very dark night of the soul and losing my kids and things like this. And painful, but a growth process. And during that time, I could be quite difficult to be with. In fact, for a period of years, I was much more like Captain Hook. I would lash out easily. I would be furious. In fact, I'm still getting rid of a lot of anger now, many years later. And it's that protect the self by being scary thing going on. But, in terms of Peter Pan, that Peter Pan had transformed into Hook and then later to discover Pan again as Peter who had grown up but was still Peter Pan
Mm.
and to regain some of that beautiful sensitivity that I really was underneath that I found it very difficult to talk about for a long time. And it's these stories you carry with you as indications of what you've learned, isn't it?
Mm.
Sure, everybody out there is now thinking about their own story, but it's not about what you assume the story is. It's what you know the story is for the self.
Yeah.
One or two things that you learn through it, and self honesty, which is painful. and to face up to that. So yeah, there's a whole ton of stuff there. Mm.
Absolutely. Mm.
And when we think about these things, they can be quite painful because we return to stuff that probably we're still feeling the remnants of. It's emotional, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think like what you said, yeah, it's almost when we work with a story and we see all those parts of those facets of ourselves and we own them, it's the mirror, we look at them, and then at a point when we know, okay, I think it's not like I've clocked it, I've clocked this level of I've done, I'm an adept now, I get all of this. No, it's more like, okay, I've gone through this room of the big house that is my life, and I've gone through this room, and maybe it's time for a different story, or maybe it's just time to live and create story through living,
Sure.
through really just being a human living in this world, and not constantly looking to be in stories, but just live and let the stories reveal themselves through our actions.
I think that's so important that they will reveal themselves to you.
Yeah.
Now, at some point, they will do that.
Okay.
I was going to ask you as well that I think there's another really important thing here is that why do you think the underworld, the netherworld, however we want to couch that, is such a frequent setting for mythic magic and transformation?
Mm. I think we touched on it before when
Yeah.
you spoke about the dissolution. And it was interesting, even the way we've been speaking. So like I can get into a rhythm of talking where I'm like really excited and we go, da, da, da. And then when we spoke about dissolution, we stopped because we felt that there's a gravity around that, what that word means and what that feeling is in our body and what that stage is in our life. And so for me, there's a reason why the underworld is this stage, which is a setting, because dissolution is necessary for a renewal. It's necessary to go through the eye of the needle and to re-emerge as a new self. And this is for me as a practitioner, and I think for so many people out there, this is part of the work. It is the constant unzipping of the old self to dissolve, to feel the internal nature of what we actually are underneath all of this, underneath the personality that wants to be relevant, underneath all the stories that we tell ourselves. There actually is this fertile darkness that we are, that we're that that we are, and we have to touch that in our life. And that for me is part of the underworld. It is that place of all the questions that every step walking down to the underworld is, who am I? What am I? What's going on? What is this? Why is all of this happening to me? And then there is a point where it's no longer about, well, who am I? It's just, I am in this fecund darkness. And only from that place can I then start putting the cloak back on of, oh, okay, I am this eternal something, but I put on the face of Anatolia or Nat or whoever else. Oh, I put on all these other parts. And so for me, that is it's the underworld isn't like hell. I feel it's where raw potential lives.
Yeah, it's very,
Oh.
very deep stuff, actually. Another thing I was thinking about yesterday is about, I mean, who doesn't think about liminality involved in the magical world and stuff like this, or worlds? Um, and there's an expression that I came across that was really meaningful, and I think it was an author, and it wasn't about magical things. It was writing about things in a different way, but it was definitely about liminalities. What's she called? Um, I think she's called Hedy Chef or Hedy Chef or somebody like that, and she had this expression of it's about no longer and not yet.
Mm.
Something in between those two ideas that is about liminality. And then that kind of reminded me, I have these weird trails of thought when I'm not having to do the other work, right? It's like Kenneth Grant and people like him
Mm.
talks about disruption
Mm.
follows eruption. I'm thinking about what's happening right now.
Mhm.
Reintegration, and like you suggested, metaphorically almost there, follows disintegration. And in between all those things, there's some weird kind of odd, there's a knowingness about this space.
Mm.
I think if we could allow ourselves to think of the netherworld, the other world over there,
Mm.
deep within, as that space of understanding, then there was a book written by Deleuze and Guattari about 1,000 folds or something like that. I can't remember. I did struggle reading that at one point. Completely destroy me, but it's not about the folds of reality. It's about what's in between. It's like a big old book. What are the spaces
Mm.
between the pages? It's not the pages.
Mm.
That's our waking self. It's the space that is important. And I think that it's something. Is this insane? I'm thinking
Mm.
about the ungraspable space.
Absolutely.
And I think that present setting, as you said, or that I think it is present. You talk about it being frequent, but I think it's kind of always there somewhere until
Mm.
we decide that we can connect or whatever, something happens. That it is that space where we face shadow or we face perhaps what we feel ashamed of or don't like about ourselves, and they come through as learning mechanisms more than anything else.
Mm.
And that's super important stuff. And I think
Mm.
it allows us as practitioners to grow. We all screw up, right? So
And we're supposed to. I think that's the point, right? It's like we have to try to screw up, to learn, to keep going, to
yeah,
pick ourselves up, even to take a break for a bit. I think this is part of my magical practice has been knowing when to just take a break because it's time to know when to play with the mundane world as magical and the magical world as mundane, like to really,
oh yeah.
yeah,
When do you leave your painting alone? When
yeah,
do you
exactly,
stop composing music? When do you put the pauses in the dance? And
exactly.
yeah,
Because we can't help but when we take those pauses, I don't know which part I will call it, the consciousness, the mind, whatever, some part of that deep part of us, it's still doing the work. It's still making the connections. And it just when the time is right, when a particular input comes in that's then the final key, then the next part of the puzzle reveals itself. But we have to step back. Like, I mean, we know, I think we know this has happened with great thinkers throughout history where they've, sitting on the toilet and that's when the idea comes. Or what was it? Was it when the apple hit, was it Einstein's head? I don't know.
yeah,
Newton's head, that's right. Yeah. Like it's when we're not doing the thing where our attention is focused on it, that's when we and that just for me proves that we really are living in this world. We are living in webs, in patterns um,
yeah,
that are weaving themselves with or without our conscious awareness.
it is. In fact, our consciousness kind of is quite disruptive in a lot of ways, and yet
Yeah.
we need that to cause a disruption for other things to happen. So
Mm.
there's something there could be hard science in this, and then there could be much more enjoyable ideas, you know. Yeah.
Mm.
Can I just ask you something about ritual and practice?
Yeah, let's do
Trying to
it.
behave. I'm trying to behave. Right. Okay. So, as a practitioner, which of course you are, and working with myth ritually,
Mm.
what might that look like beyond reading or journaling about stories?
Yeah. So I guess I'll share some ways that I have worked with these patterns, and I'm always open to hearing. I'd love to know how other people work with stories. It's just would love to hear how our different minds come up with this. But for me, yeah, it's always about finding my own way. I have to find my own way. This has just been part of the way that I operate. I've really tried fitting into particular regimented structures that others have given, and it doesn't work for me. Like, I'll just go off a bit off tangent a bit, but I'm learning French right now, and I've bought all the books. I've got all the courses. I've spent so much money on all the things that you would think could help me get there. But actually, what I've realized is I need to learn through missions. I need to be given like little adventures. Go off and do this. I need to talk to people and struggle through. My partner and I are actually learning sign language so that we are working with sign with our bodies, and I'm connecting language with my body. So also drawing pictures, and I need to connect memory with a word to a memory. So, for example, I know the word in French for slug, limace, because I was in a mountain and there was a slug, and I said, "Oh, how do you say it? Comment dit slug?" And he said, "It's a limace." So now I, remember that. So that's a little tangent, but actually, it's me understanding how my ecosystem works, because the only way that I can learn how to work with myth ritually or how to do magic is by understanding how my system works. So yeah, with as a practitioner, and for anyone else out there who wants to work with myths as keys, as mirrors, as maps, as compasses, whatever, um I would say, find out the way, and there's dancing the forces of the myth, see how it wants to move, shifting perspectives from characters. I think quite often we always want to be the hero or the one who does the really, the cool thing, and they learn and they've got the chosen one. We want to be the chosen one, but how often are we the instigator of the challenge? How often are we the bad one? The one perceived as bad, I should say.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really being able to be pliable enough to step into different characters, and different forces, and notice that we have all of them in us. I think something else that's really important for me is creating little altars for different myths, or for the characters in the myths. You know, making an altar and then visiting it and saying, what do you need? Do you want me to bring you something? And just seeing what comes. Maybe it's a little, like, it's a herb or a drawing or a little bit of wine or whatever it is, and just see what nature does with it. I once was working with a particular forest, and I was putting these sculptures that I'd made in the forest, and it was around the heart. It was this particular story around the heart, and actually, I came back a few days later, and a spider had woven a web around the sculpture that I'd left there. And for me, that was I was saying, something speaking back to me, and it's saying the heart, there's a web, there's the spider who weaves the webs and connects to the other hearts. And so yeah, working with altars has been really special for me to connect with stories, and then and give me other symbols that I might not have expected.
Yes.
Um, Yeah, and then dreams. There's always dreams. Work with dream. I'm a big dream person. I love asking a story. Hey, show up in my dream to tell me something, and then someone from my childhood will like rock up in my dream, and I will then say, "Oh, what does this person represent? Like, how is that? What does that mean?" Yeah, there's so many different ways to work with stories ritually, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah. Yes. There's so much. What's that expression? There's so much that's hidden in plain sight,
Yeah.
and doesn't take a lot of effort, but we do forget that we can do these things. Like you say about dreams, it's not rushing out and trying to buy a book on what the dream symbols mean, which are shite anyway.
Yeah.
Both they're not your symbols, they're somebody else's culturally and this, that, and the other. But you will know anyway if you sit for a little while, if you can allow yourself to sit for a little while to think about what is going on there, or to just open it up and let it follow you around for the day.
Mm.
And also things around you, like you say, things you find, so, they come and find you.
Mm.
Talking to, I don't know if you know Sian Sibley. Sian Sibley runs she's Welsh witch. There we are. She has a lovely coven down there in Wales. I talked to her recently, and she's a big protagonist of, being conscious practitioner of paganism and not wasting things in the world and things like this. And she talks about really important stuff about what we tend to buy from all these magical shops, and actually, really, they're not good, and not the people, but they're depleting the world. You can find tons of stuff around you. Then there's an argument from, yeah, but I live in a flat in the middle of Berlin and I can't get out and it's dark and miserable and I can't get my stuff. I'm like, hang on, wait.
Yeah.
If you can, go
Yeah.
and buy some herbs in the supermarket and let them dry out for a few euros, or burn those if they're not around you. But if they are around you, go for a walk in a park and breathe. And it's those things, and they're so hard to do when you feel confined.
But we're limited by our imagination, and again, it's how magic has turned into spiritual capitalism, in that, you know, oh, I can't do magic because the conditions aren't all perfect. It doesn't look like this. No, we have everything we need, and even just start small. This my one thing that I really had to program out of myself was, there is nothing wrong with starting small with what you have and let that small grow. And this applies to everything, even in business. People are like, they run ahead and they want the end, but actually work with the little bits, because that's what grows. Work with the small things. They are where it's at.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's humility to just stop and breathe and be with where we are and what we have, and know that that's enough. Mm.
Yeah. Let it lie. Let it lie. I'm just wondering, I'm just thinking about the time, because we could probably talk for a long time.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, that word. Can you tell about, well, have you got a story that's relevant to you now?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. It's one that just keeps, it's a story that has teeth, and it just keeps. It's even though I'm preparing for a few myths, I'm preparing them for this event in a few months. They're kind of working, they're in the foreground, but the one that's sort of been turning on me for about a couple of years now in the background is the king of Thessaly. His name was Eristhon, and the story goes, very abridged version, but many people will have heard the story actually, but he is the king who cut down the sacred groves of Demeter, so that he could build a banqueting table. And he's then cursed to consume himself until he dies. And this story for me, it just comes up again and again when I turn on my phone, when I look at what is happening in our world. It really is a story of humanity. That how, yeah, if we are not careful to curb these parts of ourselves that just want to devour everything, this is what is happening in our world, with nature, with each other. There's a devouring, and that's the word, devour. It's like I must consume, consumerism. I must consume, but to fill a hole that can never be filled. There's always more. And I think this goes back to what I said before about what we have is enough. And knowing that, how do I work with what I have, and know when it's time to get something new, but not from a place of I just need to consume because I look good as a big magical person who has all the things. No, what if I have one thing and I work with it and I really build a relationship and it's so programmed to my magical practice that it does way more than,
Yeah.
all the magical tools in the world that are not alive.
I don't, it's funny, isn't it, these days? It's like, we all give ourselves a public persona and whatever, and we can make ourselves look ever so wonderful.
Mm,
And yet that doesn't matter, does it? And yet we do that. So, I mean, social media has kind of ingrained something within us to do that. I can't even remember how long it's been around now, but
mm,
no. I do sometimes think what I actually put out there on Facebook, usually it's some mad ravings of Christ knows what that I do, but occasionally I just think, am I presenting this in the wrong way? Because I don't want that. And at the same time, I want to share things occasionally without providing too much empty theatre stuff, right?
mm, mm.
Can you tell us about your event? We're going to finish soon, so come on.
Yeah, great. Let's do that because I've got about 10% battery left as well
Oh, right.
on my laptop. So maybe,
Well used, right. Go.
yeah, look, this retreat, it's called Katavasis, which in Greek means to descend, to go down, to go kato is down. So it's 6 days on the island of Samothraki in the north. My father's from the village of Kavala, which is up in the north, so it's not far from there. So I've sort of been going to this area over, every time we came to Greece. And I went to Samothraki for the first time, was it 8 years ago? And I remember just thinking, wow, this place is so alive, but I'm not ready. I don't think I had the scaffolding inside myself to hold something. And I might not even, I'm not saying I'm fully there yet, but I think 8 years later I'm at a point with um just loving land and loving my practice and loving myth and loving people enough that I really felt excited to create an experience where people come together
Yeah,
to explore myths, all
yeah,
within the underworld themes, and to create our own story from, the story, our human stories, turn them into myths, and to work with nature. So it's on the 23rd, from the 23rd to the 29th of September. And
great. I mean, I will put the link to this course.
yeah, great, great. All the
There
details.
there is some time to get on that course when this podcast goes out. Before
Mm.
I'll also, if you listen to this podcast after it's gone, there'll be another one, surely. Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
I can't stop myself. I love creating event. I love people. That's actually like group ritual, and connection is what I love.
super,
Yeah.
super, super. Well,
Mm.
honestly, thank you so much for that. No, that's it for me today. I've got so much to think about. I'll tell you what I'm going to do actually. When I've finished all this, I'm going to write you a list of words that kind of came up during our conversation and just give you those back.
Love that. Thank you.
I don't know, but I think there were some so important, so many things that mattered to me in this, and I'm sure for other people, it will have stirred things up a bit.
Yeah, I'm really always open to talking to people about these topics that are so important to us. So yeah.
And I say this to some people on here, but I do feel again that for me, and I speak for my wife too, that there's something probably going to happen because of this anyway. So
yeah, totally. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
It's been great.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, go well.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speak soon.
All right. Bye-bye.